In the 1980s, America was going through a series of mass hysteria over the fear of secret and powerful satanic/witch covens infiltrating all walks of life, killing and abusing children. The satanic panic culminated with the McMartin preschool trial. The McMartins and others were accused of everything from abuse of the children under their care to taking them to secret tunnels across the country to be murdered and fed to demons, witches, and, according to one child, Chuck Norris. The McMartin preschool trial to this day is still one of the longest and most expensive criminal trials in American history, resulting in no arrests except for Raymond Buckey, whom was held in prison for 5 of the 7 years during the trial's time without actually being charged with a crime. By the time the trial and the media circus about the case was over in 1990, this cursed viewpoint about witches was effectively lifted, and the 90s was put under a spell.
I put a spell on you. And now you're mine.
Hi, I'm CB Smith, and I'm going to be talking about Practical Magic, both the movie and the book that's based on, and I'm going to do my best not to spoil everything. So let's put our witches' hats on, and look, anything can be a witch hat, okay? By the time Practical Magic was published in 1995, author Alice Hoffman already made a name for herself. Promoting her book At Risk in 1988, a novel about an 11-year-old girl contracting AIDS from a blood transfusion at the height of the AIDS crisis, Hoffman says,
I think some critics, for reasons I don't truly understand, feel that a writer shouldn't write about something that's topical, that there's news and there's literature, and the two have nothing to do with each other. I always write about issues. I think it just so happens that what I was obsessed with was what a lot of other people are obsessed with.
It's unfair to say that Hoffman wrote Practical Magic to simply chase a trend in the 90s. It could be said the same for J.K. Rowling. I mean, the first Harry Potter book came out only 2 years later. Popularity with witches come in waves, but never truly go away. In the 25th anniversary of this book, Hoffman shares her feelings on why.
Part of our fascination with witches is that they are the only female mythic figures with power. They are wise and fearless women of courage. In short, they are everything little girls wish to grow up and become.
So naturally, as a man, I'm more than capable of talking about this book. This uplifting movie about love and witchcraft begins, appropriately enough, with a public hanging. Maria Owens is tried as a witch, but unlike every public hanging in history, this one has a happy ending. Maria really is a witch, and if rope can't kill her, well, the town just gives up and goes home. American witch trials should really learn a thing or two from their British counterparts.
She weighs the same as a duck. She's made of wood.
And therefore,
A witch! A witch!
This is where we get the Owen family's backstory on Maria, waiting for her lover that never shows up, and her putting a spell on herself to never love again. But this backfires and causes a curse for all the Owens women to lose any man that they fall in love with. The call of a Death Watch beetle will warn them of their lover's death. Right, my sister's boyfriend would probably kill me if I didn't point this out, but that is not a Death Watch beetle. More than likely it's a species of ground beetle that's that word. And the sound that the Death Watch beetle makes is not this chirping sound that's in the movie. The Death Watch beetle, like many things in the movie and book, do have a deep-seated superstition behind it where the knock the beetle makes when burrowing into the framework of timber in old houses meant an omen for someone's death. The beetle does show up later on in the book as an omen of death, but it was for one time. The curse that's in the movie, however, is not here at all. The Owens women in the book do have bad luck with men, oh do they ever, but Maria's backstory is told halfway through the book where she kept to herself. Good fortune seemed to always go her way, her gardens always had plenty of food, the house is never damaged even during a hurricane, and when she gave birth, the baby never cries even once. That must be so nice. In the book, Maria did have a lover. He decided to stay with his wife, but instead of casting a spell to never love again, she simply Never Loved Again. The two prequel books that Hoffman wrote afterwards has taken inspiration from the movie, adding in Maria's witchcraft trial and the family curse into the narrative. The book begins with the two main Owen sisters, Sally and Gillian, living with their aunts after their parents died. In the movie, their dad died from the curse, and their mom died of a broken heart. The two sisters forgiving their mom for effectively leaving them becomes part of character growth for them in the movie.
Do you forgive our mother? Sometimes.
In the book, the parents died in a house fire. They were careless, so much in love they actually failed to notice the smoke and fire. I'm not being snarky, that's the actual quote. Like the movie, in the book, when the Owens were kids, they would be teased and bullied by the other kids, leaving the sisters alone by themselves. While the Owens were never invited to other houses, people would come to the house late at night for spells and potions in secret. One woman in the beginning comes to the aunts wanting to cast a love spell on a married man so she could have him. The aunts warn her not to do it. She doesn't listen. I wish she did listen. We don't see her for the rest of the movie, but she keeps popping up throughout the whole book, and it is sad, like decades and decades of sad. They did warn her, though. As the sisters grow up, Sally becomes the bookish introvert, and Gillian grows up to be the type of woman that all the men want and women want to be. She broke a lot of hearts while still in high school. If you took all the trouble most girls got into as teenagers and boiled down for 24 hours, you'd wind up with something the size of a Snickers candy bar. But if you melted down all of the trouble that Gillian Owens got herself into, not to mention all the grief she caused, you'd have yourself a sticky mess as tall as the State House in Boston. I'm not being weird with the metaphors, that's the actual quote. Gillian runs away with a boy and marries him. In the book, we learn that she left him 2 weeks later for the mechanic that worked on their car, and later on to someone else. Sally stayed with the aunts and married Michael. He's a nice guy, cleans up the house, loves his kids, somehow can afford a multi-level house working at a hardware store. This is where the Death Watch beetle and a mysterious black dog appears in both book and movie as the omen for his soon death. Michael is unfortunately killed by a drunk driver, leaving Sally to fall into a deep depression, not getting out of bed or showering, barely eating. Points for the book and movie showing a decent depiction of depression. In the movie, Gillian drives all the way to see Sally to help her grieve. In the book, it was phone calls, Gillian trying to make Sally feel better.
You can't fall apart. That's my job. Wake up. What do I have to do to snap you out of it? Life is for the living. Life is what you make of it. Come on, just listen to what I'm saying.
Gillian's voice brought a comfort that nothing else could. I'm not being sarcastic, that's the actual quote, and it wasn't sarcastic in the book. After a year on the book, Sally gets out of bed and decides to leave the aunts and take her daughters to Long Island, New York, where the rest of the story takes place. I only made passing references to the aunts in the story, despite them being such a big part of the movie, because the truth is that they weren't in the book all that much. The aunts, Frances and Jet, are so much fun in the movie. Their banter, their back and forths, their snark, so much snark.
See this couple here? He's having an affair with the babysitter, and she can eat a pound cake in under a minute.
The personality and likability are all movie version. In the book, once Sally goes to New York, the aunts are barely mentioned until the ending, and what we do get are two very bitter women, whom will look after their nieces and grandnieces no problem, but won't be caught dead doing anything so much as play with them at the park. They're less Zelda and Hilda and more a couple of Karens that think a job delivering pizza doesn't deserve a tip. Look, I'm not being hyperbolic, that is literally what happens. And Sally's kids, they grow up. And Tanya, the older one, grows up to be like Gillian. All the boys like her and want her, and Kylie is like Sally, tall, awkward, and shy. In the movie, these kids stay roughly the same age throughout, and Tanya is the older one and more outspoken, while Kylie doesn't have much to do or say other than be the adorable little girl.
Do you have a gun? Mm-hmm. Can I see it?
Mm-hmm. Sally is well liked in her new home, working in the school as a secretary versus owning her herbal remedy shop in the movie, and not being well liked. Things are seeming okay until...
Jimmy Angela. Jimmy Angela.
He was so handsome and so smooth,
He could get into any woman simply by looking at her the right way, or the wrong way. How scorching his kisses were, and the memory alone can turn her inside out.
Get over here, girl, it's your goddamn sister on the phone. Yeah, these are two very different Jimmys. We first meet Book Jimmy as a corpse in the car. We're told some things about him being this suave, charming, tough guy, but this was the only line he ever said in the book, yelling at Jillian to pick up the phone to talk to Sally. Jimmy sold drugs and Jillian fed him nightshade to go to sleep so he doesn't hit her. One day he sold some drugs that caused an overdose. Jillian gave Jimmy too much nightshade, so then he dies at a rest stop in New Jersey. Which, to be fair, a poisoning isn't even the weirdest thing to happen in a Jersey rest stop. Like in the movie, the sisters bury Jimmy in the yard near a bush. Movie Jimmy is a whole other thing. The movie really played up his sexiness. Still an abusive asshole though. Sally went to pick up Jillian, and Sally is the one ending up poisoning him. When Sally's husband died in the movie, she begged the aunts to show her how to bring Michael back to life. They warn her that he'll come back as something dark and unnatural.
Jimmy already is dark and unnatural.
Yeah, this idea doesn't seem very practical magic. Like, what is the plan here? Bring Jimmy back to life so that he technically wasn't murdered? I don't think they thought this through very well. The guy was an abusive monster before. I don't think he's going to come back a changed man asking Jillian to marry him or something.
I want you to be my wife! I want you to be my wife!
Never mind. In the book Jimmy Stayed Dead, there was no resurrection spell. Jimmy being buried in the yard, in comes Gary Hallett. In both book and movie, Gary is investigating Jimmy's whereabouts and is also Sally's love interest. Gary finds a letter sent to Jillian from Sally and used that as a lead to find them. In the movie, Gary asks around town about the Owens, interviews them to get their story straight, generally doing a good, competent job, and Gary, no! Is this how Officer Hallett interrogates all of his murder suspects? Like the movie, Book Gary is sent to find out what happened to Jimmy, hopefully bring him in to stand trial. We get this whole backstory on his parents' death being raised by his grandfather. He asks the Owen sisters about Jimmy, trying to get their story straight, and Gary, no! Gary was there to investigate Jimmy. But even back in Arizona, Jimmy wasn't the one he was thinking about when he asked his closest neighbor's 12-year-old boy to hike by each morning and sat out some food and water for the dogs, then took his horses over to the Mitchell's ranch where they turned out with a bunch of Arabians much prettier than themselves and maybe learn a lesson or two. I made this joke like 4 times already, so you know what I'm about to say. That is one hell of a sentence. You know, is it obvious that I didn't really like this book? I think the movie took the best ideas from the book and made their own thing to the point that it's almost unrecognizable. I like how both versions make magic out to be supernatural but also super mundane. Like, coffee stirring is a very practical spell. Is there one that also keeps it hot? Because I'd like to know it. You can tell the people making the movie were having some fun adding more magical elements in. Like, the book has Jillian missing Jimmy after his death. No spells or ghosts, just her remembering or trying to remember some good times in between the abuse and showing some genuine grief. I think that's very important since more times than not, the story of abuse victims in media effectively ends after they leave their partner or after the partner dies. The healing afterwards is an aspect of surviving abusive relationships that isn't really shown, and I appreciate Hoffman adding it into her book. On the other hand, for the movie, we have Jillian's asshole possessive boyfriend now literally possessing her.
I've been strung out by a guy before, but this is...
The strongest point for the movie is how it shows love. Both book and movie end on the same line.
Fall in love whenever you can.
In the book, love is very magical in that it happens all the time without warning, and it's scary. All the Owens women have men going after them. Some end up dying to prove their worth to them. Some chase after them, and it's implied they're going to rape them because they're so infatuated with them. And Gary, no! Love makes characters lose all their senses and control of their functions. Love in Practical Magic, the book, is terrifying, and it only has a happy ending because it just so happened that the men that the Owens got together with are nice? Question mark? Kylie ends up with a boy who shaves his head, wears combat boots all the time, and hates everyone at his school with a passion, looking down on them. I'm not saying he's a skinhead future school shooter, but he's giving off those vibes. The movie's concept of love isn't just the romantic, the love of sisterhood, and not just biological, but a bond of women in general. At the end, they come together and are literally sweeping away the toxic masculinity from the house, replacing it with a warm embrace of the whole neighborhood. Practical Magic, the book, at times feels like a first draft. Characters switching around, details that contradict each other. It's good, not bad, that Hoffman took inspiration from the movie of her own work. It makes me want to actually check out the prequel books to this. Otherwise, I don't think I would have even bothered. This is CB Smith, and thanks for taking a page. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I'd like to shout out to the lovely ladies offering their voices in this video. La Femme Fictionnelle, she does amazing work exploring feminist themes and treatment of female characters in some of our favorite pieces of pop culture. I recommend her videos on Jane Foster and the Thor movies, as well as her recent video comparing the female characters and their real historical counterparts in 1774 and Hamilton the musical, as well as a crossover she did a couple years back with some nobody about Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Jessica Rabbit in particular. But the biggest shout out is to my wonderful girlfriend Brittany. I love you, baby. You did great in your first voiceover work. But next time, can you talk to me the way you talk about Jimmy Angela, please? If you like this video and want to see more like it, leave a comment on what movies and books you'd want to see covered. Watch after the credits here to see the topic of the next video on this channel. I hope to see you then, and always take care.